All right. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for being with us today. We are going to be talking about our 10-minute onboarding. And I am Lauren. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at WorkBright. I have the privilege of working with all of our customers and overseeing the client journey for our partners. And Chappelle Ryan will be co-hosting. I'll let you do a quick introduction, Chappelle.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for joining us today. Like Lauren said, Chappelle Ryan, I'm CEO here at WorkBright. Really just joining today to lend expertise that we've seen across 1,400 customers. We've processed millions of I-9s and excited to share with you what we have formed here for our 10-minute onboarding process.
Wonderful. So again, glad you can be with us today. Before we go into this proven process, for those who may be new to WorkBright, we wanted to do a quick introduction of who we are and why you should feel comfortable in listening to some of these recommendations coming out. So WorkBright, we build smart onboarding software to help employers like yourself accelerate that hiring and onboarding process for employees. We do this across 3 integrated systems. So our applicant tracking, our flagship Smart I-9, which you'll hear a little bit more about, and then our full onboarding suite, which allows you to digitize and streamline that full onboarding process for all of your compliance and hiring paperwork. And our goal is really to empower employers with the best tools so that you can recruit, onboard, and retain top talent, especially in this very competitive hiring market. So a few metrics that we're very proud of over here is, as Chappelle nodded to earlier, we've processed over 2 million I-9s through our system and counting across over 1,000 organizations. And our claim to fame is doing this in an average of 8 minutes for that Form I-9 from Section 1 all the way through Section 2 validation without risking or giving up anything on the compliance front. We've been through over a dozen ICE audits that we know of, and have come out squeaky clean in all of those with 0 audit fines. So we'll get into kind of the agenda here. Then thank you. We went through introductions on our side. Chappelle's going to lead us through this process introduction of the 10-minute onboarding formula and how you can replicate this for your organization. We'll talk about the key metrics to track in order to make sure you're measuring success for these. Go through those tips and tricks so that you can start implementing these to incrementally make changes for your org. And then, of course, we're going to end with some industry benchmarks. So as you put these in place, making sure that you have some kind of North Stars to shoot for. And then lastly, we'll be going through a Q&A. So as questions come up through this conversation, feel free to type those into the Q&A section, and we'll circle back to those at the end of our conversation. So I will go ahead and hand this over to Chappelle.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so let's start with just the definition of what it is that we're going to be talking about with onboarding today. Onboarding means a lot of different things. There's cultural onboarding, there's onboarding into your processes. We are really talking about the paperwork that it takes so that an employee is eligible to start on their first day of work and ready to go. So 10-minute onboarding, 10-minute paperwork is kind of what we're talking about. We are talking about the first experience that these employees are going to have with your organization, with your HR administrator teams, when they are filling out their I-9 and the other important forms that they need to get through so that they can get to work on that first day. And 10-minute onboarding is a term that we've created to really encapsulate the best-in-class standard for this part of that process. So when we talk about onboarding today, that's really what we're talking about, being able to complete all of that paperwork in under 10 minutes. And moving on to the next slide here, why should you care about this part of the process, right? This is a small part of an overall onboarding process that you likely have at your organization. We really believe this is your first touch. This is your chance to make that good impression and also keep your organization compliant in the process and your HR teams without headaches and burdens of all of the fears that they have and all the administrative work. So for your employers, you're going to save time, reduce costs, improve your operational efficiency. For your candidates, your employees, you're going to provide a smooth, hassle-free introduction to your company. You're going to boost retention and increase your throughput. And for your businesses, you're going to keep yourself compliant, secure, against any risk of audit fines or anything that might come up in that paperwork process, right? So on the employee retention piece, an inefficient onboarding process can severely hinder your candidate throughput. We talked about that. The audit fines range from $272 to $2,700 on the high end. It gets more extensive if you're a repeat offender. So we want to really protect against that. And then for your HR teams, on averages, businesses are spending about 21 hours per week on these administrative tasks related to onboarding, equating to about $4,000. We have a ROI calculator, I think, that we'll post somewhere in here about how much you're currently spending on the onboarding process. And so 10-minute onboarding is going to help reduce and optimize each of those three components. So to show you those components a different way, this is really going to be the crux of what we're talking about today. This graph here on the right is the engagement component, is your employee facing processes in your experience. So engaging equals employee experience. Accurate is your organizational component. That's where those fines and compliance things are going to come in. And efficient is your HR team. Those are the stakeholders there, right? So what are the processes and the experiences for your HR team? We believe that by focusing on these three things and only these three things, you can achieve 10-minute onboarding, and we're going to show you how. So quick poll real quick, hearing those from the top end, which of these areas do you feel you're doing really well in right now? Is your process engaging? Or are you struggling with candidate drop-off? Is your process accurate? Forms are completed on time. Or are you unsure if everything is completed accurately? And are you efficient? Is your HR team streamlined? This isn't a burden for them. Or are they facilitating and doing a bunch of administrative tasks on that? So do we have that poll up? Ben, can you throw that up? Okay. So tell us in the first question here, what are you doing the best at right now? And then the second question is, where do you think there might be areas for improvement? And we're going to hit on each of these, but just want to get a baseline of where people are coming in today. Okay. See some accuracy, potential accuracy issues coming through. Some efficiencies. We've got some HR admins on here that feel like they're spending a lot of time on their paperwork. Yep, we see that a lot. And it looks like a lot of you are reporting that you think that you have a pretty engaging process. That's great. That's awesome. And accurate. We've got some compliance nerds in here that are going through everything on the back end. Okay. This is really helpful. A little bit across the board, though, pretty even splits. Ben, can you throw up those results so that people can see kind of where we're coming in? I don't see them coming through. Hear me do. Let me try it on my end. All right. Well, if you can't see those results, we can move on in the slides. I'll just tell you it's a pretty even split across the board. 22% engaging best, 28% accurate best, 22% efficiency best. So pretty even splits across both best and areas for improvement. And we're going to touch on all of these today. So regardless of what you put in that slide, we are here to help and support you in that process. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so now that we've thought a little bit about where we're doing well and where we think we can improve, let's talk about why we really need all three of these, right? What your business might be telling you in regards to where you need to focus in. So diving a little deeper on that. First off, if your employees are engaged in the process and we think that we're being accurate and compliant, there's a high likelihood, if you don't have efficiency, that your HR team is doing a lot of work. They might be manually keying information across systems. You're going to be prone to HR team burnout if you're not efficient in your process here. The blue and the pink, if the admins are doing a great job and your compliance is high and they have an efficient process, but you're experiencing a lot of candidate drop-off throughout the process, that may be an indicator that you need work in your engaging component. Meaning people are coming in, they're not completing things on time, or worst case scenario, they're abandoning the process altogether. I know we have a lot of staffing companies. We work with a lot of staffing companies. We hear this a lot. It is very competitive out there hiring talent right now. And especially in gig economy where they might be applying for this job and this job, whoever has that most engaging process can get them through the fastest is going to get that worker on their time and scheduling fastest. And they're going to have the best chance of securing that worker. And then orange and pink here, if you have a highly engaging process and your admins are highly efficient, but you're staying up at night thinking, oh shoot, are my I-9s compliant? I haven't looked over these things in a long time. You may be looking at some fines and putting your organization at risk. And this is the reason that WorkBright was created, right? Like, you guys as HR administrators got into the business to work with people, not paperwork. And so making sure that you have accurate files on file at all time for your employees in the event of an audit or anything else that could come in that needs to examine that paperwork is a huge component that is under your purview that may not be your favorite part of the job, right? So each of these, this is why we really believe that that little middle piece there is where we want to be: engaging, accurate, and efficient. And we're going to help you find the process to get you under 10 minutes to complete that. So now that we jump in, just to show you like what we're going to do on this next piece, there's a lot of like threes in here. So we're going to bring you along with us in the process. Lauren's going to first walk you through how to measure where you are today. How are you doing in those three components? Then I'm going to walk you through optimization tips that we've gathered from our customers over the course of 10 years of business here and running I-9s. How are people optimizing each of these categories? And then we're going to give you some examples of real life cases of how people are doing this. What's the industry benchmark? How am I doing against other people in my space? And I'm just going to throw this out here now. This is an ongoing process. We're going to give you a lot of information here. We have roughly an hour. We're going to try and do it a little less. I talk really fast, so we'll probably get through it quickly. But I do want to say, like, this is something that is a continual process. We have what we call like onboarding bloat, which is where we all take a really good shot at putting together a beautiful process. And then over time, people add on something, or, oh, we should do this as well. And then we should do this as well. You should come back to this year over year and say, are we maintaining and repeating a 10-minute onboarding process, or have we added in a bunch of stuff that may not be necessary? We deal with companies that have hundreds of forms in their account that probably 20% of them could be cut. And we give that advice when we're going through the implementation process and say, this form looks the same as this form. Do you feel like these ones should be together? So this really is not a one-time thing. It's something that you need to come back to every year, continue to measure, continue to optimize, and see how you're doing against industry best practices. So Lauren, over to you to talk about those initial measurements.
Great, thanks, Chappelle. At WorkBright, we talk a lot about measuring what matters. And if we don't have KPIs and metrics built around them, they don't get the attention that we know that they need. So we're going to walk you through how to basically set these metrics up in a way that's easy to monitor and review so that you can optimize on the optimization practices that Chappelle goes through. So the first one is that candidate throughput. This is going to be the percentage of candidates who actually complete the onboarding process. The second one is your error rate. So what percentage of compliance related forms have potential errors? Those are the ones probably keeping you up at night because it's not the most fun part of the HR world, but it is incredibly important. And then the last piece is that admin time. So the average amount of time HR admins spend onboarding a single candidate. So we'll start with the candidate throughput. And it's a pretty simple formula. It's the number of completed onboards divided by those who started the onboarding process. So it's a standard conversion rate. If 80 candidates start and 60 complete, your throughput is going to be 75%. We recommend reviewing this at the end of each hiring cycle if it's cyclical or seasonal, and at the very least on a quarterly basis. Because as you implement some of these changes, you're not going to want to do all of them at once. You're probably not going to be able to do all of them at once, but we want to make sure that we're tracking the improvement to some of these changes. And this is probably the one that most of our employers don't have a really good handle on when they come in the door. So having these benchmarks as baselines before you get started is important. A few just practical tips here. Setting up automated reports. So making sure that you understand the candidate progress and completion rates in an automated fashion, leveraging dashboards so that your team isn't having to go through and manually recreate the wheel every time here. And then just making sure you have clean data. So ensuring that accuracy and completeness within your tracking systems, because right now this may start in one system and end in another system. So if you're having to marry that data together on the back end through Excel spreadsheets and things of that nature, makes it much more difficult to get a really clean read on what your employee throughput metrics look like. So we'll move on to error rate here. This is the error rate, as we're talking about, is specifically in compliance related forms. So again, Form I-9 is going to come up often because there is much more exposure and risk associated with that. If ICE or IRE were to come in, we are seeing very hefty fines associated there. So the formula on this one is going to be the number of forms with errors divided by your total number of forms submitted. So quick example here, 5 out of 200 forms, you're looking at a 2.5% error rate, which actually is pretty darn good. Most customers that we see come in that have done the I-9 process manually or in other systems, we can see upwards of 70, 80% errors on some of these I-9s that come through. From a frequency perspective, we recommend laying eyes on these, at least from a spot check perspective, in a more frequent manner, because these can build up. And then if you have a backlog of thousands of I-9s that need to be audited, it can be overly cumbersome, overly burdensome, and that's when you really get to be at a place at risk and high exposure from a compliance perspective. So we recommend at least monthly mini audits and then a comprehensive annual review to make sure that you can kind of tie a bow on those and feel really confident in your process. A few practical tips on this side. Scheduling that audit in, making sure you have those clear checkpoints, use tools and technology to help support that. WorkBright's working on an audit tool right now where you can actually run those I-9s through an automated process and identify any errors based upon logic, which takes a lot of time off your HR team's plate and looking at every field on an I-9. Then as you identify the errors, making sure that you have a system for logging those and, more importantly, tracking the resolution against any updates that are made. And then lastly, from a training perspective, ensure that you have regular training for your staff on compliance requirements. And that's for new folks coming into your team, as well as just ongoing trainings. There are a lot of regulatory changes that happen, especially across the Form I-9, that are important to stay on top of as an organization. And then lastly, we will move over to admin time. So this is the average amount of time spent onboarding each candidate. And again, this is just for the paperwork piece. So looking at the formula here is total admin hours spent divided by the total number of onboarded candidates. So if you're hiring 50 candidates and your admins are spending 100 hours sending out reminders, chasing them down, asking them to update things, that comes out to about 2 hours per candidate. So we recommend to track this even more frequently on a weekly basis, or really a daily basis, as your admins are tracking their time, and then review it monthly to identify how some of these optimizations are improving performance against this. A few practical tips. Equip your team with with time tracking software. There are tons of great time tracking solutions out there that you can leverage. You don't need to do this forever, but as you are making this an initiative for your organization, it is a good practice to at least establish that baseline and then track progress against that. And then make sure you have standardized processes for this onboarding process as it relates to your organization, so that everyone's doing the same thing, that there's consistent time tracking, there's consistent processes around how you are bringing these employees through to your system. And then to recap all of this, and I neglected to say on a few of the previous slides, we do have some great tools that we'll share out after this webinar to help you hone this for your organization. So we have some great tools where you can throw in some of your numbers and see the output of efficiencies and how you can look at this for your org. To recap this, and I think it's interesting layering the stakeholder into each of these. The first area is focusing on engaging those new employees. They are your key stakeholder here. Are they enjoying the process? Is it clear to them? Is it easy for them? That is going to increase their employee throughput and conversion rate. The second one is that accuracy. Who really cares about this is you as the organization. You are the one left holding the bag and on the hook if you were to have an auditor come in and face some of the hefty fines associated with compliance challenges on that front. And then lastly, on the efficiency side, the stakeholders, the HR admins. I don't know about you, but most of the folks we talked to did not get into HR to chase down paperwork. So the more that we can automate and take off their plate allows them to spend time doing more impactful things for the business and finding more satisfaction in the work that they're doing. So now that we have a clear view on metrics, we have baselines in place, I'm going to hand it over to Chappelle to talk through the tips and tricks to optimize your current process.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. And go to the next slide, Ben. I just want to come back to this and say, I don't want to overwhelm you here. Before we jump in, I just want to recognize there's a lot of ideas that are going to come forward. These have been gathered across our customers over time of areas that we're all focusing on internally and that our customers are telling us that they're focusing on. We've pulled out the top 2 tips in each of the 3 pieces, components on the Venn diagram to really help you focus it on what's going to be most impactful in moving towards the 10-minute onboarding. But you don't need to implement them all at one time, right? Maybe there's a low-hanging fruit you've identified. Oh, I think that engaging is where I could use some work. Really hone in on that. My challenge to you is going to be to come out of here with one initiative you can put in place next quarter. I don't know if your business also runs on a quarterly basis like ours does, but we're just getting set to really think about Q3. And there might be one idea in here that can move you forward in this. So think about what that is. Take a note on it. I'm going to give you 6, 2 in each category here. Move on to the next slide and I'll show you what those are going to be. So layering onto what Lauren just presented, in the engaging for your employees, we're going to talk about their experience and their momentum, give you some levers to pull there. In accuracy, we're going to talk about technology and processes you can put in place. And in efficiency, we're going to talk about delegation and automation that your HR admins can use. So let's jump in. All right, we're going to start here in the engaging. So we're talking about our employee stakeholder. How are we optimizing their experience? And the first thing we want to do is we want to the best of our ability to keep them in one uninterrupted session. So this means SSO, single sign-on. It's okay to have multiple systems as long as you can seamlessly move an employee from one to the other and they know where they are and how they're moving through those platforms. Ideally, and this is something that's possible with the WorkBright platform, is that you want to embed your onboarding experience where your employees already are. So I said earlier, we work a lot with staffing companies. A lot of the ones that are leading in this area have their own apps where they've taken a best-in-class ATS they want to use, a best-in-class onboarding system, and we are that onboarding system that is right in there. So the employee is coming to staffing company app ABC, they're able to apply, take a job, complete their paperwork, and move to time and scheduling all in one interface. So that is really going to be your goal. If you want to get to 10-minute onboarding, you're going to want to keep them all in one experience and have your onboarding embedded right along with those other components that they need to do to get to work at your organization. Okay. Also, we want to make sure whatever your experience is, it's incredibly user-friendly. So does it work on any device? Over 80% of our employees that are coming in and filling out paperwork are doing it on a mobile device. So that means not only is the platform you're using mobile friendly, is it built mobile first? We want all of our forms to first be able to be completed on a mobile device really seamlessly. And then the desktop experience is secondary to that mobile experience. Are there clear instructions and validation throughout? So in our platform, and this isn't a sales webinar, but this is the way that we build our product is to get to 10-minute onboarding. So I'm using WorkBright as an example of how you move towards a 10-minute onboarding. And I'm just going to give you some examples of what we do to facilitate this for our customers. WorkBright has over 35 fields on the I-9 alone that we validate to make sure that information is going in correctly. So, for example, date of birth is not equal to today, right? Or social security number has the right amount of characters if they're entering that information. Those are all field validations that are going to really optimize that experience for your employees. And the biggest one that we do that really optimizes this for employees is we use what's called OCR technology. So optical character recognition, to where they can take a picture of their passport or whatever they're submitting to submit for their work authorization documentation. And we're going to lift off the document numbers and put them automatically in. So we're eliminating the errors that they have to do, the time that it takes for them to say, which one of these is the passport number versus they're not having to look through and find those things. We're going to lift that for them automatically and put it onto Form I-9. So really optimizing that experience for them all the way through. Second thing we want to optimize here for our employees is the momentum. So what we're really talking about here is gamification and communication. It's what's going to give you maximum momentum for your employees. So some ideas here, you can offer incentives for finishing paperwork, right? Like you get early access to benefits, or something that is at the end of completing this paperwork, you get access into our time and scheduling. That's a huge one. People want to get to work fast. Use visual cues throughout that process. Optimize for the most complex parts to come at the end, right? Like I'm 80% of the way through and maybe the last thing is Form I-9 because it's the most complex form, but it is the last thing I need to do. Let me just power through and get this done. So you're gamifying that experience using visual progress bars if you can to tell them where they are, communicating ahead of time. Hey, this process is only going to take you 10 minutes if you can sit down and do it. And of course, we want to make it super convenient for them. So I already said we have a high mobile usage on our platform. We want to make sure that reminders, logins, everything is able to be accessed via text message. It is shockingly high rates of especially younger employees that don't even have email addresses at this point. Everything they're doing is through their mobile experience. And we want to lastly make sure that if they get interrupted, if something happens, if they're filling out paperwork at a bus stop and then their bus arrives and they need to hop on, that everything they've done up until that point is saved so that they're not having to start from the beginning, right? They can kind of do it where and when and how they want to complete that paperwork. So those are our 2 tips for optimizing the employee experience. Is really, well, the engagement is looking at that experience and the momentum that you're able to give through that. So that's engaging. Let's move into optimizing for your organizations. This is our accuracy component. And the first optimization tip leverage that we're going to give you here is leveraging technology. And like I said, not a sales webinar, but we are really built specifically for this thing, right? WorkBright is an example here of we were designed uniquely to do these processes for your team, including the compliance components. So there's other all-in-one providers out there that have some elements of onboarding that may be sufficient for some lower volume hirers where you can have more HR administrative time. But when you start getting up into the thousands of onboards per year, you really want to look for best-in-class providers that are staying on top of this stuff for you. So I've highlighted a few of those features of how we do this with technology, features like OCR, right? One of the main errors that we see is someone put a citizenship status in section 1 that is in direct contradiction to the supporting documentation that they submitted down in section 2. That's a big risk of a fine for your organization. How do you not catch that? With technology, we can put guardrails in place to make sure if they select a citizen of the United States, then only the documents from list A, B, and C that are presented are those that correlate with the citizenship status that you presented. Another thing that I'm just going to hit on down here with authenticity, this is something that we're developing right now that I think is going to be a huge step forward for employers. It's document validation. We all know that fraudulent documents is a hot topic in HR right now. This is becoming more rampant and widespread. We see with employees that are coming in using fraudulent documents for their work authorization. This new document verification will check things like, is the appropriate hologram associated with this to make sure that the document that's being submitted is valid? And for certain documents like driver's license, it's even going to go back to the databases to say, is the person that is submitted here on section 1 matching the driver's license that is associated in our database? Do the names match, right? So some additional guardrails that technology is able to put in place for you that's going to really help keep you compliant and make sure that you're letting in workers with valid documents. Last thing, I just want to make a note to make sure the systems you're using are secure. I trust nobody's doing this, but if you are using alternative procedure and you are sending supporting documentation via email, that is not a secure platform. We are pretty confident there's going to start being some penalties because we are putting, with alternative procedure, it's new, and we might be putting people's PII at risk by not having appropriate guardrails and facilities set up for transporting this most sensitive information. So whatever technology you're using, just a quick note, make sure you see their SOC 2 report, you know how your data is being handled, and that it is compliant with US standards, GDPR, all of the things that are out there now. And then the second piece here on optimizing compliance for your organization, this is our accuracy component, is we want to have repeatable, streamlined processes that are documented and shared across your HR teams. So do you have a document or a checklist to make sure that I-9s are completed within 3 days? If you're handling this in-house, who is tasked with staying up to date with the most recent TPS statuses, right? How are you doing those compliance components? This is an ongoing changing workforce. We all have seen how many, this year alone, the refugee statuses that have come in under TPS, the expansion of documents on expiring dates. This is a whole mess of a world. And if you're not working with a third party that is tasked with this compliance component for you, you need to be holding regular training sessions for your administrative teams. USCIS and E-Verify actually put out great webinars. Our internal teams are all required to sit through a bunch of those when they come in and onboard into our organization. I recommend the same for your organization. It really helps get you up to date. And then you need to do them ongoing because there's new stuff coming out all the time about what is and is not compliant. So at WorkBright, if you were working with a technology provider to do this, I would hope they would be doing the same. We handle all that compliance stuff for you. We work with 2 of the country's leading attorneys to kind of check over everything we do before we release it. And we even go as far as to indemnify our customers, so indemnify to hold harmless, if any fines would be uncovered as related to our process. So this is how confident we are that we're keeping your process compliant. Of course, we can't guard against, are you actually making sure these people come in under 3 days? We're putting in all the guardrails, but we are going to say like the way that we facilitate I-9 is compliant, and we are the ones that are responsible for staying up on top of the new version of the I-9. Is everyone using it? Are we using supplement A now or supplement B instead of section 3 now? All of those little pieces, you really either need to have a process in place or have a technology provider that is doing that on your behalf. All right. So that's your organizational accuracy component. 2 tips that we're going to talk about in this HR admin efficiency component. First thing is we want to delegate. Delegate as much as possible. And the biggest thing that you can delegate in regards to the 10-minute onboarding is going to be your section 2 work authorization review. So how we do this is we have a best-in-class solution. It's a patent pending technology around allowing the employee to choose their authorized representative. So for those that aren't familiar, an authorized representative process, an authorized rep can be anyone that the employer designates is valid to review section 2 work authorization documentation and sign off on section 2. And so how our platform does that is we let you, the employer, put in validations on who you are saying is okay to be an authorized representative. So you can set the age. Maybe you want them to be over 25. Maybe you do or do not want family members, right? USCIS says it's okay for it to be a family member. We have companies that aren't comfortable with that for whatever reason. They want it to be a neighbor or someone else. So we let you put the guardrails, and then we allow the employee to select whoever that person is. Maybe it's my neighbor. I need to sign off on my section 2. I can go directly over to them. The employee enters that person's cell phone number. It sends them a text message. That person then receives a short video explaining what it is that they're doing today. We geofence the 2 individuals to make sure that there are 2 people within a vicinity for the purpose of completing section 2 work authorization. Put all that information onto your audit trail so you make sure that you have 2 unique individuals. They review the documents that were submitted, they review the physical document, and they sign off on section 2 under penalty of perjury. So you can imagine, we're talking about 10-minute onboarding process here. There's no way without this kind of employee finding the person that's close to them that you could get to under 10 minutes, right? If you're using a notary network or a network of individuals for section 2 signing, or even alternative procedure, you still have that burden of, okay, I'm done with section 1, let me go schedule this. Now I need either access to transportation or I need access to internet to get the alternative procedure done. So this really is the best in class way of 10-minute onboarding is your initiative across your organization. then this is the way that you're going to be able to facilitate that section 2 piece to get that done. All right. Moving on from section 2, for other tasks, TNCs, photo match, all that stuff is going to come back in your verify. Make sure that there are admins dedicated to running those processes and leveraging tools that are built out for collaboration. So if Lauren's on my team and she normally does TNCs, but now she's out for 3 days, I want to make sure, because we love employees to take vacation, I want to make sure that someone else has access and knows what that process is. It's documented and it's repeatable for anyone to get in and be able to keep that engine moving, even if your HR administrators are out. So this is the delegation piece. The second one here in HR administrative efficiency is automation. And I've touched on this kind of throughout the other ones as well, but I'm just going to highlight a few more things that you want to focus on here. Action-based triggers to launch parts of your onboarding process. So for example, in WorkBright, when someone completes all their forms that are 100%, we can send an email to your IT administrator. Now it's time to issue that person a computer. Or you could have a trigger in your HRIS system that says all forms are completed. Now let's launch them into our time and scheduling platform if you don't have that custom app that's doing it automatically. So there are APIs out there. It's 2024. Let's get our systems talking to each other. We have an open API as well, where all of that information that's happening within your ecosystem can be translated to the other systems so that things are automatically triggering and moving based off of people completing this paperwork. So we're just going to keep them moving as fast as we can. Another thing is, if they're not completing, we want to make sure we have automated reminders that are getting sent out on behalf of your administrators. It's not Lauren having to go hunt down and say, what was her email again? Let me find it so I can email her and tell her to bring it in. No, we're going to do that all automatically for you based off of dates that you put in with increased urgency leading up to that first hire date, saying you really need to get these forms in, you really need to get these forms in. So make sure that stuff is being done on your behalf to lower that HR burnout and make sure that automation is happening across your paperwork. Okay, Ben, you can go to the next slide. I think we covered it. We are down at the end here. We got experience and momentum and engagement, technology and processes in keeping you accurate, and delegation and automation in your HR administrative efficiency. So Lauren, tell us about some of the benchmarks that we're seeing across customers for our evaluate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chappelle. So you're going in, you're implementing some of these changes, and we wanted to just set the stage for what best-in-class numbers look like. Obviously, this is going to vary based upon industry. If you are in a staffing company and you are competing for talent against 3 other staffing companies and talking about hundreds of thousands of employees a year, that industry benchmark may look a little bit different versus, you know, an organization hiring 100 a year. But we wanted to give you a jumping off point. Also, if our team is very well knowledgeable across all of these different industries. So if you wanted to talk with someone specifically about your organization to create some specific benchmarks that feel really attainable, we'd be happy to do that here. The first metric, though, is through that employee throughput and conversion rate perspective. And the industry benchmark here is over 90% of the people that start get all the way through the process. The highest impact of all of the things that Chappelle just talked about is really that embedded I-9. So we see a lot of our partners say that the I-9 process is where they have the biggest drop off in their entire onboarding flow. And so putting that at the end of their process and making sure that it's embedded into that one seamless experience is really the critical component in moving towards that 90% plus conversion rate in the 10-minute onboarding speed. The second piece is error rate. So I mentioned earlier, you know, on average is what industry studies are showing. 70% of Form I-9s have some sort of compliance error. Leveraging technology like the OCR, optical character recognition, and document verification, we are seeing these numbers under 5%. There's always something, you know, that may be able to get through. Technology can only go so far, but this is taking what we are seeing in the industry of above 70% down to under 5%, which is an incredible relief on your HR admin team. And then lastly, the admin time, we've been saying it all day long, all hour long at least, is this under 10 minutes per employee. The median range that we see for folks who embed the I-9 into their application is 8 minutes. And so using that delegated section to the authorized rep technology and allowing them to select someone within their general vicinity allows them to get through all of that paperwork in one user session, which is an incredible feat when you're competing for talent that may be also in an onboarding process with another competitor who's then asking them to log into another system versus creating that seamless user flow for them. So Ben, will you, thank you. So these are metrics that we're seeing across our thousands of customers, some of which are hiring hundreds of thousands of employees a year. We wanted to put a face to a name, and Allwork is one of our partners who is an employer of record for global beauty brands. They partnered with WorkBright to onboard 9,000 employees in a 3-month period for a new customer that they brought on board using this process. And the proof is in the pudding here. Through that transition, they were able to increase their employee throughput, that conversion rate, by over 50%. They saw an 85% improvement in error rates where admins were no longer finding the errors and having to go track down and remediate those issues, which then also led to an 80% reduction in time. Because again, they're no longer having to spend all of the time finding the errors and then chasing down the responses, as well as just sending the nudges. As Chappelle mentioned, technology like WorkBright will automate that entire process for them and get that communication directly into their text messages, where we're seeing a much more increased response time versus sending yet another email that gets stuck in the inbox. So you can see some additional case studies here on our website, but this is one that we're very proud of in working alongside another staffing company that we thought would resonate well with our 10-minute onboarding process. So that really wraps up the meat and potatoes of the presentation today. But we did want to spend some time on Q&A. So Chappelle, I'll hand it back over to you.
Yeah, Lauren, we've got a couple of Q&As. If you can check the chat in there, you can maybe tee those up for me. Yeah, this is just a highlight of services. You can buy each of these kind of individually. So we are really a onboarding platform. We do have an I-9 Verify solution that is sold separately and an applicant tracking. But if you're interested in any of those, go ahead. I think on the next slide, Ben, we'll put up a quick poll. If you want us to reach out with any additional questions, let us know. Also happy to talk to you about your tech stack in general. If you're wondering, like, how do I get these things to talk to each other? I'm really interested in that. We have a number of resources that can help with integrations that we're always happy to recommend and just talk to you about your overall tech stack. So go ahead and throw up that poll if you want us to reach out on that. And Lauren, do you have those? I think we had like 3 Q&As.
Sure do. Yep, absolutely. Keep them coming. If you have other questions, I did see one question come through about these slides being sent out. We will send the recording out to everyone who registered for the webinar. So be looking out for that in your email over the next few days. Let's see here. First question. So when can I initiate paperwork? Doesn't it have to be on the first day?
Okay, so you can initiate all of your paperwork anytime after a verbal offer is made. So our recommendation is going to be like as soon as we have like a accept job or I'm ready to go to work, that you are moving forward with the offer letter and all the other paperwork at the same time in one workflow. That's how we're going to get to that 10-minute onboarding process. So any barriers that we put in there is going to slow down anytime that we have to say like, okay, I've completed this, now initiate this step. You can do it all at once. We recommend that you get those forms handled well before that first day of work. No one wants to come into their first day and sit in a dimly lit room filling out their name 15 times on 15 different forms. So let's get that handled before, and then they can come in and you can start your cultural onboarding and all the great stuff that your company does and get them to work as fast as possible.
Great. Second question we have is, if there are errors that occur that you find after the fact, how can you go about correcting those and not exposing yourself to more risk?
That's a great question. So What we find, as Lauren said at the beginning, is I have personally been through dozens of audits with our customers, just kind of holding their hand through the process. There's probably dozens more that have happened without us ever needing to be involved, because in our platform, you can just administer in an ICE auditor to review paperwork directly in our platform. But what we have found as we've gone through those is that these auditors are looking for patterns of manipulation across your I-9s, right? There's substantive fines and then there's corrective fines. If you see something wrong, go through the right process. Don't use whiteout. Don't try and hide it. Don't erase it and put in a new date. Strike through it, correct the date, or in WorkBright, request a new submission and put in the additional notes. I'm requesting a new one because I found an error. Anytime that you're proactively auditing, finding errors, correcting them on behalf, the auditors are people and they're going to look on that way more favorably than if you were attempting to conceal an error that you had, right? If there are widespread issues, like we have had companies that have come to us that said, I'm a new HR admin, I did an audit and I found that we have not countersigned I-9s for years. That has happened. We're going to recommend that you consult with an immigration attorney about doing a full reconciliation process. And still in the same vein, you write a memo. It was uncovered on this date. Here's the corrective action that we took to it. Just be forward about the actions that you're seeing, and it will be viewed way more favorably that you are auditing and doing your best to keep your paperwork compliant and get the right people to work at your organization.
Great, thank you. One more here is, what are the most common errors that you typically see on the Form I-9?
Yeah, so luckily within our platform, we don't see a ton of errors. So I'll talk about why people are coming to us. The number one place that we see errors when people are coming to us, it's miskeying, right? So it's miskeying. Either the employee didn't understand which set of numbers they were supposed to take for the passport number, and so they entered the wrong one. Or, I don't think I mentioned this in automation, our platform takes that information and sends it directly to E-Verify. If you're taking information from I-9 and manually inputting that to create E-Verify cases, that's a miskeying error as well. So there's a lot of that, just like any time that you're having to manipulate this data again, that it's not flowing seamlessly, or where you have the biggest risk of errors coming through. And then the other thing that I'll say as most common errors is just miseducation. It's just people not understanding that you can't use whiteout or that it needed to be done in 3 days. It's really like front end, I didn't know. And unfortunately, I didn't know isn't as favorable as I knew, I saw it, and I corrected it. It really is your burden to know what's going on. And so a lot of the errors we see are just people not understanding or being able to keep up, right? It's also a crazy changing landscape all the time. And it's a moving target on what is and isn't permissible. So I would say miskeying and miseducation are where we see the most common errors.
Awesome. Thank you. And that really wraps up the questions that we see coming through. You have 12 minutes back in your day. When does this ever happen on a webinar? So we just want to thank you so much for spending your time with us this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you're at. Again, we will be sending out the recording as a follow-up and reaching out to those who are interested in learning more information. But very excited for you to hopefully have taken some nuggets, as Chappelle mentioned earlier, at least one, to go back to the team and think about how you can implement some of these optimizations to increase that speed and throughput and compliance on your side as you approach Q3 or the second half of the year. And if you have any other questions at all, feel free to reach out.